Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations. All right, so I've got a little bit of a different video for us today. I thought it would be a great idea to actually share with you and invite you into the world of books that have shaped my astrological perspective. So I want to take you through what books I have significantly found impactful for me. And I think it's also great to kind of share the reasons as to why these books have deeply impacted me and what I've learned about myself on this astrological journey. So I think the best place to start is actually from my upbringing. I was raised in a home where, luckily for me, I have South Node in Sagittarius, along with Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune. I was raised in a household where I was fortunate enough to have access to esoteric books. And weirdly enough, one of the books that is not actually esoteric at all is an encyclopedia that had been dedicated specifically to space and all the information and knowledge that had come with it. And I distinctly remember having moments where I would return back from school, or I'd be outside, I'd be sort of gazing at the stars, kind of in a childish wonder of, what's this about? And I would return back inside, and I would always find myself gravitating towards this encyclopedia book and opening it up and reading about different planets and their characteristics and their behaviorisms. I'd learn about and find myself just fascinated by just understanding the universe per se. And I didn't know that was going to essentially be the origins for what I consider myself to be, which is somebody that is deeply fascinated by the cosmos. And more importantly, the nature of what it represents to us as human beings. I think that has deeply matured in me as I've grown and as I've aged, is that I found that the orientation towards the cosmos and the sky, which I'm sure many of you in some way have found yourself doing the same, is that it started off with just a fascination and a beauty, and it's turned into a way in which I personally find meaning and try to resolve underlying dynamics about my own interpretation of reality. But it's also served as an opportunity for me to share that passion with a lot of people who are on a similar path of trying to use the stars or the cosmos or the canopy that we call the sky as a way of navigation that seems to be deeply embedded in more of a mystical way of looking at reality. And I suppose my Neptune in Sagittarius speaks deeply to that. So I went through my life, just kind of having these available to me, having these kind of conversations, not getting too deep into it, but noticing that they were around, and words and different types of understandings of karma would kind of bypass my ears, and I'd pay attention. It was really, at the beginning of the 2000s, 2003, 2004, 2005, when I had a significant event happen in my life that disorientated me in a way where I found myself gravitating towards astrological books as a way to try to make sense of the world. And a big part of sense making for me was very much associated with, how do I regulate my own interpretation of my feelings and emotions and confusion about the world and the environment outside, right? People, their behaviorisms. And I used it as a tool to kind of regulate reality. At the time, of course, this was not what I was thinking. I was just thinking that this is helping me create conversation. But that was really when I started to pick up my first astrology book, and it was actually Linda Goodman's Sun Signs. And I spent a great deal of time learning how she would describe the facial features of different signs and how, you could really see the sort of difference between the Leo personality and the Scorpio personality, which of course that became a very strong focus of initiating conversation with people. And I would be constantly analyzing people's faces and trying to see if this was true. But I distinctly remember that every time in my journey to come to the books that I'm about to share with you, I would notice that every time I came to the end of a book and kind of absorbed it and understood it, there would be another book that would pop up that would be a little bit more advanced than this previous one. So I'd go through steps of just learning, learning different books. And it was only actually until in 2008 that I discovered a natal chart. I'd seen it in previous books, this little natal chart, but I'd never explored it in the way that I obviously explore it now. But I was introduced to learning about natal charts, and it's on astro.com. I found myself on the forum asking questions and kind of posting my chart. There was an astrologer there that had said, if you post your chart over here, I'll get around to kind of giving you some feedback and thoughts around it. And I remember the list of people was very long. And I would wait, right, like weeks, where I'd come back to it every single day and see, how many people in the queue now. And eventually I got to the point where my actual chart was read, very, very small, just a couple of paragraphs, not even, I think it was like 2 paragraphs, which was incredibly insightful for me. And I really loved it. I was like, this is something that I really actually find so fascinating. And I think with many of us that have come into astrology, we're initiated into like our air signs, our sun sign, our moon sign, and our Aquarius. Or listen to me talking about my own astrology chart, the rising sign. I have an Aquarius rising sign. So coming into astrology, learning the natal chart, learning these luminaries was, that was my entry, just as I suspect many of you had the same. And I remember at the time also I was working in a company in England called Nationwide. It's a publicly owned bank. And I was talking to people around being, did you know about your Saturn return? Or have you explored this? Or did you know about this thing? And I'd get a lot of faces that would be like, what is this guy talking about? I quickly knew that this skill set that I'd picked up for a long time ago has become a way that I would, again, as I said, make contact with reality. But I also became aware that this wasn't the phenomena of general day-to-day conversation. So that was an interesting kind of moment of recognition within myself, that there was something that was different about myself in terms of my curiosity of what I considered to be normal conversation. That's that Aquarius rising, along with Uranus and Jupiter conjunction in Sagittarius, right? You can see the mysticalness there. But in 2010, in 2009, in November, I traveled back from England, back to South Africa, and it was Christmas, and my brother had said to me, hey, this is your Christmas present. And this is the book that he gave me. You can see it's still even wrapped in the plastic that I put in because I didn't want it to get damaged when I was traveling. So this is the actual book. This is the first big astrology book that I'd received. It's called Alan Oken's Complete Astrology, the classic guide to modern astrology. And this was the book that I received from him in 2009. And this has deeply shaped my understanding of astrology. And I encourage any of you, if you can find this book, to absolutely have this as part of your collection. This book has got so much amazing stuff, including one of the sections where Alan specifically shows you how to cast charts if you didn't have the internet, which I think is a great idea. But one of the things that really stuck with me with this book was he breaks down the concepts of the natal chart and the human experience in a way that I found deeply relatable, but also psychologically provoking, in the sense that this book was the first book that actually initiated me into exploring astrology beyond the traditions, but actually seeing that there's a lot more depth to it. He related, understanding, I think it was the mutable signs, and I still use this as an analogy today, where he was talking about mutable signs in the same way as that how the seasons change, right? There's a constant state of change regarding the seasons, and mutable signs are a reflection of how there is a constant motion and change that will occur. And so we're always in that kind of metamorphosis process. So Alan Oken, Complete Astrology, that was the first book that I would say deeply began to shape and orientate my understanding of astrology and the world of astrology, and more so the human relationship to your natal chart. So that was a big deal. So that was 2009. And in 2010, I immigrated to Sweden. And I was on the internet, and I think it was 2010, 2011, the kind of crossover between those 2 years, and I discovered evolutionary astrology. And more so, Kim Marie, who is somebody that did study under Jeffrey Wolf Green, and I found her website, and she was talking about the archetypes in this kind of way that I was like, whoa, this is going beyond complete astrology, which at the time I thought was like the leading edge. You know what I mean? So I clicked on the website. I was like, send me a DVD of some content that you had, and I sort of bookmarked it, and then I actually forgot about it. Like it kind of went into the distance. And I got the DVD, I watched it, but that was as much as it was, right? It was only actually until I had met my partner, Jennifer, that I came into, and we came into actually more so. I rediscovered evolutionary astrology. And at the time, we were really wanting to actually go in a direction and see how, explore astrology, which was a really big milestone for me. I would even say that probably one of the most important milestones in my astrological journey has been, and was, and is still to this day, the moment where we found a common understanding of how powerful astrology was and how beneficial it could be to us. And that's when EA dropped back into our lives, and we bought Pluto. So Pluto, this book over here, Pluto 1, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul by Jeffrey Wolf Green, was our first Pluto book that we had purchased together. And this material is arguably, I would say it shapes like 90%, or no, about 80% of the way that I work with astrology. And I say that because my foundation is rooted in evolutionary astrology, because I was seeking a form of astrology that would speak to the essence of the human experience. And this book absolutely 100% did that. Jeffrey's insights and work around it was completely revolutionary. And as you can see over here, this book has been with us since 2011, 2012, right? So this book has been used. And if you come across any deeply committed evolutionary astrologer, you'll find that we all have this Pluto book in common. It looks like it's been used, which I love to be a part of that club. But yeah, this is the Pluto book. And what Jeffrey does here is he goes through, I mean, you can even see look at how the natal chart is drawn in this book, right? It's so funny. I actually have a picture of my daughter where she's like 3 years old, for instance, with these super cool glasses, and then she's reading the Pluto book. She was, raised with Pluto as the reality around her. But Jeffrey Wolf Green explains the Pluto evolutionary meaning here in terms of the karmic axis, which is Pluto and its nodes. He talks about the evolutionary dynamics around Pluto, and he also goes through Pluto through the houses here, which, if you haven't read your Pluto through the houses in this book, I encourage you to do that and find a way for that to happen, because you'll be incredibly surprised at how deep and accurate and exposing his understanding of Pluto through the houses is. And especially for yourself, you'll just find yourself nodding and going along. And that book has shaped, again, as I said, the fundamental core baseline of my astrology practice. And Pluto will always be closest to our hearts when it comes to our astrological understanding, but also the way that we actually come in to understand reality in our lives. It's one of the reasons why this channel exists, right? Okay, so what was also interesting that I forgot was that so I was here in Sweden 2011, 2012, and I'd met somebody, and this is actually how I sort of came back into being, looking for evolutionary astrology. This older man that I went to college with over here, at the local school, had, he was from Britain, and he had said, do you know of Jeffrey Wolf Green, Evolutionary Astrology, in the Pluto book? And I'd said, oh, I know evolutionary astrology, but I don't know who Jeffrey Wolf Green is. And he said, go check out Jeffrey Wolf Green. and the Pluto book, which was, I mean, that was a moment in time that I think was deeply, it changed the trajectory, right? Because EA disappeared, I'd found it and then I disappeared. And then the odds of somebody that spoke English, that was from Britain, that sort of said, hey, how you going? We speak the same language. We seem to be interested in the same kind of mystical explorations. Here's a book called Pluto by Jeff Wolf Green. Go check it out. And here it is in my world. And it has been the cornerstone of both myself and Jen's way of interpreting reality. Okay. So the third book that has deeply shaped my perspective on astrology and my worldview when it comes to how I work with astrology is Pluto number 2. So as you can see, again, this has also been very well used. In fact, I think it's even coming off at the side over here. But Pluto 2, the relationships, right? So Jeff Wolf Green wrote Pluto 1, and that was about Pluto through the houses and learning about Pluto and what it meant in your chart. And then he wrote Pluto 2, which is in essence for relationships. And he lines out some really great things in here. Like, for instance, in the book, he talks about the Adam and Eve myth, which is deeply rooted in the doctrine of Christianity. And he was exposing the underlying repression of the feminine archetype through this myth. And it is a very big part of Jeffrey Wolf Green's work that I think drove a tremendous amount of how he personally saw evolutionary astrology and the benefits, and including this time that we're living in right now. So the Garden of Eden myth is in this book over here. And again, he talks about the natural way of how our religions have seen the sort of emphasis of the masculine energy and the suppression of the feminine energy. And he explores the dynamics as to why that happens there. He also actually talks about something that I think is really fascinating. It's definitely one of the things that I find the most interesting in EA outside of its core principles, which is planetary nodes. And if you think about it in terms of the moon has nodes, think about that the planets have nodes themselves as well, and they deeply are deeply impacting the nature of your evolutionary trajectory. And so in here, he kind of talks about the outer planets, particularly Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and the significance of what happens when you have transits to these planetary nodes, not only in your own chart, but also as a collective. And there are some videos on my YouTube channel that actually talk about these things too. But in here, what he does is he talks about what happens when two people come into a relationship and what happens when you have a natal composite Pluto. So, you might be in a relationship with somebody, you check your composite chart, and you find that your composite chart between yourself and your partner is a Pluto 4th house. And what he talks about in this book is what are the evolutionary themes that relationship will go through when Pluto is in a specific house. And me and Jen actually on our YouTube channel did a series of videos where we talked about the relationship dynamics around Pluto in the houses, right? So if you're in a relationship with Pluto in the 1st house, Jeff writes about it in the sense that both of these people need incredible amount of freedom and independence to figure themselves out, but also how to be able to still be in a relationship. So this is incredibly powerful when it comes to understanding the reasons why the relationship began, the reasons why the relationship can stay together, and what could actually break it apart. Very, 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 very powerful stuff. I love this book, and it definitely goes on the shelf over there. Okay, now that's a lot of information, a lot of books, and I still have 3 more books that I'd like to share with you around what has deeply shaped my core perspective and philosophy. Now, when it comes to exploring evolutionary astrology, you'll quickly find that there is a strong orientation to understand and see that this is not the first life that you've lived. This is not the first incarnation that you've had. And so when you look at an evolutionary astrology chart, what you're actually examining is the events leading up to this life and what are the sort of precursors for the next series of lives. Incredibly profound. And so for me, on my journey of self-understanding, I was like, okay, well, how do I communicate EA to people in the same way that it impacted me? And what type of language can I use? Because we have very diverse ways of saying that. So what popped up into my world is this book over here. It's called Life Cycles, and it's called Reincarnation and the Web of Life by Christopher M. Bach. And this is actually an academic book, academic studies that where this character, Mr. Christopher M. Bach, explores academically through exposing people to types of therapy and actually coming to some really powerful conclusions about the nature of what Jeff is actually talking about in these two books. This is very metaphysical, it's very plain, it's very hard to interpret sometimes, but the book itself speaks about a deeper reality, which is that these experiences that you bring into your life, these desires, these attachments, these emotional complexes, they don't just form randomly, they're occurring because there's a soul memory. And this book explores through experimentation, how those actual memories can be formed, how they manifest, how they play out. And it's a fantastic book because it gives you literature and language that allows you to communicate Pluto and Jeff's work in a way that, doesn't necessarily make you sound like you're somebody that just smoked weed all day and pays attention to the mystical, abstract, nonlinear nature of reality. So Life Cycles, Reincarnation, and the Web of Life, fantastic book. And this definitely has shaped my orientation and understanding of it. Okay, now coming into Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, coming into understanding what it was about and how it shaped me, Jeffrey Wolf Green was born in the 1940s, which means that when he came into his Pluto, it's not his Pluto, but his Uranus opposition and all of the other things that made him deeply popular, this is the 1980s, there were students of his that were Pluto Virgos, and those students became more popular. They started to dedicate their lives to understanding and exploring Jeff's work even further. And two people have specifically stood out for me that I have personally met. I found great communion when it comes to talking to these two people and their books that they've written. And so the first book that I want to share with you that is very much succinct and aligned with life cycles is this book from Patricia Walsh over here. Patricia Walsh. And she wrote a book, I think in the early 2000s or mid 2000s called Understanding Karmic Complexes, Evolutionary Astrology and Regression Therapy. And what I really like about this image here, the flowers, is that she speaks about, I've just got to find the cover. Let's see if I can. Yeah, it's called. So she writes over here, it's the moonflower, the moon lily, the hell's bells, the devil weed, the devil's cucumber, the devil's trumpet. And she specifically put it on here to illustrate that when you actually consume this flower, you find yourself being in an experience where reality's lines are blurred. And so, what is actually real, what is not, becomes sort of integrated into your perspective to the point where, you can say that it's a hallucinogen, which in many ways it is, but it blurs the lines of reality. And this is a fantastic book in the sense that she speaks, she actually synthesizes both Jeff's work and I would say life cycles in her own way through her own experiences and in her own work. But she explores the different astrological archetypes using an evolutionary astrology concept and writes specifically about clients that she's worked with. And in this book over here, it gives you great language to see evolutionary astrology in action. And reading this book opened my eyes up to ways of understanding how archetypes are not just the planet. When you read astrology information on the internet, it's so dry and sort of linear and okay, Aries means this. But when you explore evolutionary astrology in the context of this book, and at least what she has done to enhance EA, she's brought in the dimension that I think Jeff was tapping into, which was that we're not just sort of one lifetime, one-dimensional people. We carry deep emotional memory from many, many lifetimes. And oftentimes our compulses, our underlying drives, our fears, our phobias are rooted in past life experiences that we're playing out in this lifetime. And so in essence, we're actually just in a consistent echoing of our deep memory. And each lifetime is a representation of potentially working through those dynamics, which to me is fundamentally just amazing. Okay, the last book that I'll speak about today in terms of astrology is this book by Mark Jones. So Mark Jones, The Soul Speaks, and he's talking about the therapeutic potential of astrology. I think that both Patricia Walsh and Mark Jones, both Pluto Virgos, have brought an incredible amount of depth to EA. Not that it didn't need it, but depth in the sense that it opened us up to the potential of not only understanding why the soul is here and what are our lessons, but how to actually integrate these experiences into the psyche and into our more conscious identity. And because of that being the case, why I love this book so much is because the words, the soul speaks, right? That's what evolutionary astrology is. It's understanding that these archetypes are expressing themselves and we are housing them, and the soul is speaking through us, which is why if you're listening very carefully to the way that you communicate and your fears and phobias, you might find something actually more deeper about your underlying emotional reality. And what this book does is explores how the soul actually expresses itself and speaks. And one of the things that I loved the most was he talked about Uranus and Saturn, and this shaped me a tremendous amount. Right, Mark Jones was deeply influenced by Jung. So is Patricia Walsh. She's influenced by Jung. Jeffrey Wolf Green was definitely influenced by Jung as well, Carl Jung. But in this book over here, it's like midlife transits, and he explores about, what happens when you go through your Uranus opposition and the Saturn square, which is a very important thing because as you mature, you go through these different life cycles and they deeply impact you. Understanding how those cycles work and how to actually navigate through them and integrate those experiences is where the real magic lies, in my eyes at least. So this book, The Soul Speaks, fantastic book, and it has deeply shaped the way that I see reality from an astrological point of view. So that is a conclusion of the books that I have, or I consider to be the fundamental cornerstones of, what evolutionary astrology is for me and how it came into my life. And also my journey of picking up different astrology books and then having this kind of quantum leap from, I had Uranus transiting my third house. So quantum leap from sort of mainstream traditional astrology to, oh my gosh, what the hell is this type of stuff. So I felt, and I still feel at this point in time, that there is one more book that I actually want to surprise you guys with. And I want to share this book with you because it is not astrologically based, but I feel that this book speaks deeply to the nature of the times that we're living in. And there are many books that have actually done this. But this book in particular, I find one of the most fascinating to read, and yet probably one of the most complex books to read as well. Because all of the stuff that you read with Mark Jones and Understanding Karmic Complexes, Patricia Walsh, Jeffrey Wolf Green stuff, for me, I want to know the source code. And so, as I said, many of these astrologers have been deeply influenced by lots of work. Daniel Jar, for instance, deeply impacted Jeffrey Wolf Green's work. But this book over here is something that I consistently keep contemplating and using as a way of framing reality. And you'll see that in the work that I do on my channel in terms of talking about the astrological transits, etc., this book is one of the ones that guides me in a deep way. And it's this over here. It's Carl Jung's book called Ion. And it's called Research into the Phenomenology of the Self, which it is. And so if you read over here, the title, it says the title comes from the Greek word for aeon or age and refers to the age of Christianity. For in Ion, Jung is concerned with the collective psychic development that the Christian era represents. And if you read Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, you can feel the essence of Jeff's sort of message in there, as well as what I consider to be the culmination. Jeff talks about the culmination of the Pisces age into the Aquarius age. You'll hear these things. But this is a really great book because in here, what Jung exposes and explores is how we have been shaped deeply by these astrological transits and what are the dangers that comes along with our age, plus the natural insight into how what I consider to be today, at least, especially with religious wars that are starting to just erupt everywhere. Um, this book speaks to why those things are taking place. There's tremendous amount of need to explore the suppression and regression of the emotional reality. And I think evolutionary astrology is a tool that deeply helps people come into exploring their own transition of the ages within themselves, because you're alive at this point in time. Because part of you is actually here to explore and understand how you have been shaped, and also how your emotional responses can be shaped by this kind of collective transition at the moment. Okay, so Ion, fantastic book, difficult to read. I encourage you to get this version of it at least, because it's a lot less, it's not as dense, but it doesn't mean that the book loses its value. It just means that it's a little bit more easier to read for us. And of course, all Jung's books were not actually written in English originally, so there's a transcript of that. All right, peeps. Thanks very much for listening. I really hope that this, opened you up to my world. And I'm curious, what types of books have you read that have shaped your astrological practice? Until the next video, guys, take care. Bye-bye.